Should I go again? Or?
No.
No, okay, yeah, I'm happy to okay. So for those on Zoom, essentially what we're gonna do, and I feel it's quite funny. Essentially, like we're gonna have two random sources of variation to answer this question. So it's gonna be a field experiment. So on the one hand, we're gonna basically have some control people who get no information about the incumbent, and then essentially and we're gonna cross-randomize whether people are polarized or not. And that's kind of the big innovation here. Although I had said that we're quite lucky in succeeding at getting at that. But essentially, what we're gonna do is that we're gonna be de-bias people. So essentially, like the kind of the polarization environment does not kick in how they process information. Okay, I'll be clear later. But essentially, like this is kind of you need these two sources of random variation. But before getting into that, let me motivate. Yeah, perfect. I'm always scared about these screens. Yeah, okay. So let me motivate essentially like kind of the context and sort of what led us to think all this question. So when we pull out this picture, so Mexico is ranking first in the world in terms of COVID fatality case ratio. Okay, and this is not. I'm gonna move this so you can see. Okay, that's a bad idea. I don't know how to get rid of this without you losing. I think we can do that. So and it was not necessarily because we were undercounting cases, right? So it could be the fatality case ratio is high because you're really missing out all those cases, which we did, but it's still, if you look at that, Mexico still had like ranks very high in terms of sort of actual fatalities. So in the normal times, you would expect that any incumbent takes a massive toll. So in terms of popularity, because of such performance, so we can check this, and this is not going to be surprising for you, but normally you do this outside of Mexico, and people are like, wow, no. But essentially, we can look at the support for AMLO right before the pandemic, 62% of approval, very high, and we can look at essentially at the time where I show you those pictures, and essentially untouched. Right? So how can it be that you have, or at least some of us think, which is basically lots of this, which is a terrible performance. Especially related to other countries, and still have like an untouched level of popularity. Right? So that's kind of like and one of the potential answers is the incredible levels of polarization that you have right now in Mexico. So you can get data on approval, presidential approval, and split it left to right, and essentially like everybody on the right thinks that AMLO is the devil, and everybody on the left thinks that he can walk on water. So you might think this is probably usually what you always get. So if you split the type of polarity, we can go back. To Peña Nieto, and so that's kind of not what it is. Essentially, this sort of such level of stark approval versus disapproval correlated with levels of baseline ideology is something that is quite impressive. And actually, I've been looking at this data for a report I'm writing right now, and you can see this consistently actually throughout Latin America. Essentially, you say over time, it's like people that really are pro-incumbent or massively pro-incumbent. Those that are against are really, really against it. So essentially, we're kind of really polarizing our views about it. Okay, so now, how we should be thinking theoretically about how polarization really affects the way we kind of process information, therefore how we shape sort of accountability. And there are three ways, broadly to think about it. You can think of it just from a Bayesian perspective. So if you have a Bayesian voter that's getting this information, whether you polarize that person or not, essentially in terms of how they feel effectively towards like the other side, should be totally independent from how they update information. So in a way, in bottom line, from a Bayesian updating story, essentially like there should be like no differential effect when people are polarized versus when they're depolarized. What could happen though is what we call sort of the indifferent hypothesis is that this relationship between sort of information and sort of process and updating and voting could get attenuated. And there are two ways through which this could happen. One is basically like a behavioral one, and the other one is a Bayesian with mistakes. The behavioral one is something that you might have heard of, which is basically motivated reasoning. And the idea is that usually what people tend to do is that once some information that doesn't kind of fit their prior, they get a signal of that, they're gonna discount things that that don't really fit their priors, and they're gonna sort of update on things that kind of make sense for them. So essentially, like any negative information about the incumbent for supporters will be discarded. And for opposition people would be sort of like there will be a bigger update. But the problem is that because they're opposition people, like there's not much update to be happening, and therefore what you do is that you weaken the relationship between the two. So that's kind of like what we call mild motivated reasoning. And then from a Bayesian perspective, there's a very, very cool paper by Cheng and Xiao in JET actually show that if you like a patient who makes mistakes, and first, once you get a signal, you update about the source. And then with this new view about the source, how accurate it is, how much you can trust it, and so on, then you update about the signal, which a patient should never do. You should fix the baseline prior on the source and just update. But if you do this double sort of updating, so essentially you can get the same problem essentially that I mentioned before. Essentially, so even with the patient that makes some mistakes, still you will have attenuation. Okay, you still have some accountability though.
I have just more of a clarifying question.
Yeah.
I think both of these models have to do with kind of interpreting signals and being right or wrong, right? About whether the politician is doing a good or bad job, like in an objective sense. But I guess when we're judging politicians, there are also subjective views or like preferences, right?
No, right. And that's literally kind of the second part. So the first part would be like, the Bayesian way. And sort of the second part, and the third thing that I want to show in a second is really about like, is your view about sort of like, so you have some preference, and the idea is basically that should that preference shape how you see the source and therefore how you see the signal? If it does, which what I'm telling you is actually no Bayesian. So essentially what's Bayesian is basically, it's like, like I think terribly of AMLO, for example, and then he says something and I don't like the source, and therefore like I'm gonna update accordingly. But it's not that what he says reshapes what I think about him, and after that I reinterpret what he just said because of the new updating. That's not Bayesian. So then you can use, so if you have a sequential, which I'm going to show you that in a second, you have a sequential game where essentially you have multiple signals, that can happen. Essentially, you can update about the source, and then when you get a new signal, use the updated source from the previous signal. So that's totally Bayesian. So dynamically, that's okay. But but it cannot be that once you get a new signal, you basically first update about the trustworthiness of the source, and then with that updated trust, then you interpret the signal. Right? So if you do that, you do this like kind of this little double dipping of chain and show, and then what's going to happen is that you, although you are Bayesian, still you're gonna weaken the relationship. Still you're gonna have some relationship, but it has to be that it gets attenuated. Okay. The interesting thing is probably also what you might have in mind is the backfire hypothesis, which is and there if you're Bayesian you do need dynamics. And this is the idea is pretty straightforward. Again, you can have it through behavioral biases or through Bayesian. And the idea is like, look, I'm told, let's take, I'm from Argentina, I'm a Boca fan, and they put me in front of a River Plate fan, and we have to decide which team is better, River or Boca. Essentially, what happens is that we're gonna have like a very heated and stressful debate, and we both walk away probably thinking that our teams are better than the others, even more strongly than we started the conversation. And actually, there's a lot of work on social psychology, and even with fMRI, where you light up, you see how people like you give them something that's not concordant with their view of the world, they get super stressed. They really like make a big effort to counter the information, and if you assess their baseline beliefs and the posterior beliefs, they even seem more strongly against the signal of what they got. You have tons of evidence sort of on this, and sort of also historically in American politics with climate change, like Democrats, Republicans, and so on, right? So, and the whole point basically is that precisely because you're really arguing against a particular sort of signal, at the end of the day, you end up being even more convince yourself about what you thought initially. Okay, so and this creates the exact opposite, essentially, like so once you provide some information, people are going to really polarize also on views, and therefore like accountability even gets reversed, right? In a way, some people that so you can get sort of incumbent supporters negative information about incumbent, and then at the end of the day, they're going to be even more likely to support that incumbent, right? Spoiler alert, that's what we're going to find. Okay, so and then you can get this through a Bayesian way, which is this very complicated paper by Gensko, and the idea is that you get infinite signals about for different sources, and if you start with very small biases towards one or the other, you can converge to a world where like every time I'm a Democrat and I see Fox, I think that whatever they say is actually is negatively correlated with the true state of the world, which is not inconsistent also with probably what happens in the States, right? So that's kind of like the three versions. So and the idea is given the results I'm going to show you, so we're going to try to interpret kind of what kind of theory is consistent with what we're saying. Okay. Questions on the theory? That's pretty much all I have on.
Just out of curiosity, I think that probably is that these are within settings of developed countries or the US or.
It applies. Unfortunately, sort of applies. I mean, I'm going to show you some results right now, and sort of I think we do have evidence from the US on backfiring. Unfortunately, most of the literature is US. So it's been these guys are 30 years ahead of us. It's also because they have been dealing with the problem, especially for certain topics like gun, abortion, and so on. Right. This is it's almost impossible to change people's mind and actually like to prevent them from getting polarized. Unfortunately, what's going on is that, and I don't have the global picture, is that like the whole world is becoming heavily polarized, and certainly Latin America.
Would it also like promises, like
Campaign
would it be reinforced by the promise? Say, for example, politician or observer say,
yeah.
I'm going to convert the IMSS in Danish hospital,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then people get there and there's no medicine, there's no doctors, and in spite of fact, you ask them and then they say, yes, but it's even more probable that it's going to become that Danish.
So you're gonna laugh about, you're laughing about this, but actually I have a student right now who's looking at, you know, the removal or like the change of Seguro Popular, and he looks at essentially whether sort of what happens with actual delivery and people's satisfaction, and it's kind of what you're saying, like delivery goes down, people are more satisfied.
Yes, I mean,
anyway, like there's a whole side conversation. And like, by the way, by no means I'm attacking AMLO or anyone, these are just examples. But essentially, I do think that but there are other like, things that come into play. But essentially, like in a way, like, I think it's a good example that probably like people. So before, like he promises something, you know, pro-AMLO people. So people that are against AMLO are gonna think that actually it's even less likely now that we would like converge into like a Danish, you know, like health system. And AMLO supporters probably like, you know, they're gonna actually buy into that, despite kind of even having some negative information. And so they're gonna rationalize, oh, probably he can't do it because the position is really like, you know, making it hard and so on. And you can always like kind of get these beliefs to justify what happens. Yeah. So So I don't have evidence on that. But I think, you know, theoretically you could extend it to that, so which is very problematic, especially even what I'm going to show you. Yeah. Okay. So how do we go about, you know, really testing this empirical? One more thing. Empirically, we partner with Data Civica, which is an NGO here that essentially really like wants to use data to improve democratic accountability. That's kind of the motto, and that's kind of what they do. And really, they run a Facebook campaign ahead of the local elections in 2021, showing people essentially on like, you know, Facebook ads. I'm going to show you later how this works. Information about like the relative performance or the municipality in terms of cases and death relative to the state. So essentially, like you will get information about whether like your municipality was basically in the worst tercile, the best tercile, or just like an intermediate tercile relative to other municipalities in the States. And the idea of the benchmarking is that we don't really have a good sense of like, first, we don't really know how many COVID cases we had and death. And also like, it's going to try to say like 20,000 is like, it's a lot given that, you know, it's like we don't really have a good idea of kind of what's the data generating process of something that's entirely new. But once you benchmark it, essentially people can really like know like, am I doing better or worse relative to that? It's very simple for people to update on that.
And supposedly they care about that, no? Supposedly people care about relative standing.
Yeah.
In other contexts.
And I have some actual papers that show that it's really like when you provide, not always, but when you provide basically absolute information versus benchmark, people react much more with benchmark information. And also there are like theoretical reasons for that to be the case. Right? Happy to, it's actually a bit complicated, but I'm happy to look over lunch about that. I am really interested in that. So I say this basically like this is like one side of the randomization. Essentially, some people are going to be controlled, and some people are going to be treated. Okay. Now what you need to do essentially is also you need to, since we have a baseline situation of polarized Mexico, we're going to need to depolarize some people. Okay. So how do we do that? So what's going to happen is that if you follow this literature, what you really need to do is that you have to prevent people's triggering this defensive processing. So essentially, like the way kind of motivated reasoning and even, you know, the Bayesian, you know, double dipping works is that people are going to attack the source to justify kind of like their prior beliefs. Okay. So what you have to do essentially like is kind of prevent people like, you know, prevent this triggering this defensive processing. So essentially what you really need to do is that you have to kind of ask people sort of like there are different ways to do it, but really like you know, to kind of buy into the source, right? And not becoming like biased, and then you provide them information. What you cannot do is the reverse, like just essentially like get the Boca River discussion, and at the end of the day, guys, you should chill. It's okay. It's like you should really listen to each other. Like, that would never happen. Like you really have to at the very beginning, you kind of have to say, look, this is like a very reasonable person, you know, and so like get people to buy into the source, and then you give them what's counterargument to it. And that's pretty much kind of what we're going to do. And the way we particularly do it is that we're gonna, before we actually provide information about the source, is that we're gonna ask people not to become sort of ideological or biased about the information that we're going to show you next. Literally, we're going to instruct them so that you're going to engage into the bias. And this basically works in the social psychology literature, and in the lab, it works in the field. I'm not saying this generalizes, but at least the good thing though is that we do have like kind of first stage, and therefore we're going to have these two sources of randomization: information versus not, and whether we can sort of like prevent people from being biased when presenting information versus not, and that allows you to answer the question. And everything's going to be measured, like the main thing that we have, through vote share data. Essentially, like it's going to be a fifth of Mexico in the experiment, and we're going to be focusing. It's going to be like very targeted Facebook ads. So we're going to have basically like a casilla level, section electoral level electoral results. So this is not a survey stuff. Like literally, this is basically like a real world field experiment. Yeah. Okay. And we're going to have very interesting findings. So, Centro, yeah.
Does that really work? I mean, people don't get defensive when they say, oh, I'm going to show you something, but please stay calm, blah, blah, blah.
Sorry. So it's interesting. Like we obviously like have been doing experiments on information accountability for a while in Mexico, and so but Mexico has been changing, so I had to kind of adapt and figure out like I was expecting like some, maybe not really fact-buying, but certainly a certain attenuation, which is why we went for this design. So a lot of stuff that we have piloted in the past, focus groups and so on, is built in here. You see the designs, like which is basically building on that. But we did pilot this additional component of asking people this, and we have like we don't have a very large N, but essentially like I can tell you that our Ys were very against being asked not to use their feelings to process information. So I mean, I'm not saying that that it's like that can be generalized, but it was very funny that I was like, no, what do you mean? I want to use my feelings, and so unfortunately our data speaks against that being a general thing, right? But we go mixed information, and again, this is a bit of an uncharted territory for us in the way that I always like all my papers like patient. It's really about like people are pretty patient, and using the workhorse model, you can get quite far. You see that we no longer live in that particular world. So essentially, what we did is which is used like this whole US literature lab in and trying to and get what they learn and bring it into our design. It was a long shot. I think we're quite lucky. I'm not saying that this basically generalizes to all other contexts, but we do manage to our results are very consistent with people actually not using their emotions and so on. So literally, like the way it works, I'm going to show you this later, is that we actually ask people, please consider the following information without getting carried away by your emotions or partial preference. That's the line that does 5 percentage points of the vote. Okay.
Maybe you could look into some of the kind of like desirability bias in surveys, right? That people like pleasing. I mean, here it's being done through Facebook. So
exactly. So
there's not a person that's
exactly
asking you the question, but I think people do tend to want to like please the survey taker. So maybe
right, but here it's far from. I mean, let's get back to that. This is the beauty of basically of having a field experiment 10 days before the election. So in a way, like this is not like an immediate response to like a question. Like this is like people see this 10 days after they vote dramatically different. Right. So and again, so I'm going to get back to this specifically that like it's just like this is a whole literature on kind of warning nudges. So we're not the pioneers on this. So essentially like these folks have worked quite a bit on this. And again, but the key thing is really that so what you have to do is you have to prevent this sort of defensive processing. That's kind of like the key. And there are different ways to do it. Some people, for example, like just give them like nudges that basically they warn them that, by the way, you're going to get biased next. And if you do that, basically that people don't get biased. Some other people like literally train them about biases. So I give you like a 5-minute course on how people get biased and and this works for like a bunch of bias, like correlation neglect and so on. You just like teach people that they engage in these biases and then they're less likely to do that. We just choose this particular nudge of like trying to prevent like just tell them they might get biased and therefore please don't do that. And as it has worked in the lab, it's going to work in the field. So what do we see? First, the ads were super successful. It was just amazing. Essentially, we're going to have more than sort of like 7 million views, okay, of ads. And so we're targeting like a fifth, like 2/5 of a fifth of the country. So, so in a way, like so our first stage in terms of how the Facebook impressions essentially is like 0.8 for every registered voter that we try to target. We actually get them like to actually see like just at least get the ad on their Facebook feed. How many actually like saw enough? It's going to be a little lower, and I'll discuss that later. But this has never happened to me before. Essentially, like in this particular context, Mexicans were really interested in this type of information. We won't have an average effect on incumbent vote share because naturally, like, it's like a neutral effect because sometimes you're above, sometimes you're on top. So in a way, like on average, the information is neutral. But we are going to see essentially like what I anticipated is that if you don't de-bias people, there's a backlash effect. People that are shown negative information about the incumbent actually are more likely to vote for the incumbent. And people that show like positive information about the incumbent actually are less likely to vote for the incumbent. So that's sort of on average. And there are compositional effects, like who is reacting this way is different. But what's most important thing is that once you actually like depolarize people or you de-bias them before they see the information, actually things go back to the standard world and they start behaving. So they forget about the emotions and rationality kicks in and they behave as patient. And importantly, for even like tercile of you fix the tercile essentially where you're in the worst case versus the better case, the difference in vote share between those two, whether when people are polarized versus not, is 5 percentage points. Quite sizable. So it's not a small, it's reasonable, it's not unreasonable, but still it's quite sizable. That might define some elections. Okay. So I don't know what I should do this now. Okay, yeah. So essentially, we could have stopped the paper there in a way, like, given our pre-registration, like essentially, like we show that polarization does affect the way people process information and certainly accountability. Now, we want to go a little bit further, and what I'm going to show you next are things that were not registered. So essentially, this is basically like ex post analysis that was not part of the pre-registration that we did, but it speaks very consistently that that what we're really picking up is sort of like our treatment, like preventing this motivated reasoning. So if you look at the motivated reasoning literature, as I mentioned, like something that is crucial is that people really make an effort to fight information. So we try to get sort of like in the field, like measures that approximate people actually making an effort to counter the information. And one of the things we have is actually like the angry reactions of people to the Facebook ads. So this is the beauty about like paying Facebook for these ads, is that you get all these analytics and you know exactly like how many people click against the ad saying like this really infuriates me, like I'm angry with this information. And the other one, like, it's like more obvious is turn on. Essentially, like if you really like, maybe you were not very pleased with incumbent, but now someone attacks that person, okay, like I'm gonna go and to turn off for that person. And then so that's what basically like different outcomes. And then also what we can do is like we can look at heterogeneity by like 3 things. The first thing is going to be like obviously like past vote share, because essentially like the way that the kind of prior beliefs to mediate the 2 mechanisms is very different, right? So if you're a motivated reasoning person that gets negative information about the incumbent that you were supporting before, you should actually increase your support. If you had a very high beliefs and you get negative information, you should update even more further because there's more scope for you to update, right? So you get very distinct type of predictions. The other thing that we do, which I think is pretty cool, is that we focus on values. And essentially, like if you look at Benaguan-Tirol sort of like motivated reasoning argument, people tend to fight information and engage in motivated reasoning for 2 main reasons. One is basically like prior beliefs, and this is kind of what we do here, and the other is basically their values. And so the idea is as follows: you're in a community that has really gone. I mean, you might have even lost someone. The community has gone through like a really hard time. The economy is down and so on, and you're like kind of like an incumbent supporter. So you're doing bad, but somehow you're trying to justify that like everybody's doing bad, and this guy or woman is is doing their best. But now someone comes to you and says, actually, you guys are the worst. So on top of that, it's sort of like in your face. It's like, you're like the worst in the state. So if you're someone that really cares about the community, you're much more likely to fight that information and engage in motivated reasoning than someone that does not have those communal values and say like, okay, who cares? And and we're going to be able to measure using a very nice, cool like Facebook ad technique, how many, like the share of people, of Facebook users in a community that actually have communal values. And I'll show you later how we do that. And sort of, and then the last thing that we're going to focus is the role of stress. And so if you look at this literature, like a very important mediating factor for motivated reasoning is people that either become more stressed during the experience or that come more stressed into the lab. Those are the ones that are much more likely to engage in motivated reasoning. And the way we measure this at the municipal level is with like domestic violence. So it's kind of like the closest proxy we had. Essentially, we're expecting people that have. So we try to get informal employment. It was very hard, and we didn't have power with the TOE, like the NOE version during the pandemic, and and informal employment actually didn't quite move as much. So essentially, we wanted. And so then the best proxy we had was the cases against related to domestic violence.
sorry, wouldn't that be really endogenous because it's not actual domestic violence, it's reported domestic violence, right?
So
that
no,
is
this data has a lot of problems.
Yeah.
They say, but given like at the municipal level nationwide, that's really subject to those concerns. Yeah.
And I think the other thing I was gonna ask is, would an empirical implication be that the places that had the most COVID deaths, which are like the very bad news, would those places tend to become more polarized in the sense that, you let these people know, like your municipality did really terrible in terms of COVID, and so the people that are pro AMLO are gonna be really angry about the news and are very likely to, support AMLO even more, and the people that don't like AMLO are gonna be like, oh, you see, he did everything, like.
Right. So, we're gonna see. You see the
not
results.
necessarily.
We're gonna see in the extreme. So essentially, like I'll talk about like we try not to exploit that variation by blocking the randomization. Really, like that's blocking on the levels of terciles that you are in. So to avoid like a cross variation on that delivering the results. But once you fix it, it is the case that precisely like intermediate levels of information should not do much for either one, and really you should observe people like so separating in the extremes. And that is that if you have negative information about incumbent, the ones who are gonna backfire are the pro incumbent supporters, and but the other guys should basically like this is no news, right? They already had that, so essentially they wouldn't change that much. And the reverse will happen on the opposite. The ones who actually are against the information exactly are the ones who.
So it's like a cross.
Yeah. So you have different compliers in both sides of the distribution that goes into the opposite way of Bayesian. Yeah.
Okay.
And as you can imagine, essentially, like we find support for all these, these outcomes kind of like speaking the way they should, and this heterogeneity is as predicted with it. And I'll go, hopefully I have time and I'll explain more in depth, but I think that pretty much you have a good idea that broadly like all our findings so suggest that first like polarization does mediate information processing. It's very harmful for accountability. And with the evidence we have, with this number register, like everything is consistent essentially with motivated reasoning, like playing an important, like being kind of an important bias behind what's going on. The other things like we cannot really reject that some complicated patient could do the same thing, but essentially like broadly, essentially at least is consistent with that.
Yeah, a clarifying question.
Yeah.
How do you know if the municipality where there's?
I'm not sure. Yeah. I get into the.
And I'll get
a
question later.
Yeah. So I'll for the sake of time, I'll just like I'll jump on the contribution like so the big contribution is really like kind of bringing these kind of behavioral stuff sort of into political economy, and the kind of the closest paper to ours is an AR by Sanda. She did a campaign in Turkey. So against the incumbent, there was a referendum, and she observed some backfiring for one particular tercile, but she doesn't have this variation of like people being, and that's consistent with polarization, but like she doesn't have like variation on whether people are polarized or not. So in a way, like we can nail that down. Otherwise, you can have stories about like prior beliefs being correlated with other things, and sort of and that also explain for that. And then, as I said, like there's a lot of literature on motivated reasoning and nudges, like everything in the lab, and kind of we're bringing this sort of into the field. And more broadly, we're kind of connecting, like behavioral science, social science, with kind of accountability, and which seems to be quite relevant in these growing polarization times, because our Bayesian models, like this, start this interaction of what we see.
Excuse me, exactly what do you think for accountability?
So accountability is you should punish bad performers and you should reward good performers. Yeah, that's sort of our view of it. Any other view of? Okay, yeah, great. Cool. I should have defined that. Yeah, good. So a bit on the context, although I have like a very, I'll go through quickly through this, but like obviously in Mexico super polarized. I already show you like a plot at the beginning. Within AMLO might play a little bit of a role in fueling that polarization, and sort of, and also important is really like for this, both for polarization and also for the experiment, the fact that it has massive widespread use of social media sort of in Mexico is really helpful, because unfortunately that really sort of fits on what López Obrador says in the mañaneras, and sort of, and you can see how you can sort of track down how like polarized tweets and sort of on Facebook tracks down what happened in the morning. And but also important is you can really reach most of the electorate through Facebook. So and this is not the general thing, sort of, and actually so people sort of spend sort of an average of 3.5 hours a day on social media in Mexico. Okay, and you see this in other countries as well. Potentially, it's quite in a way, like if you want to reach out to them, maybe you should try social media, right? So it doesn't mean that in other countries that's also the case. And also, like again, it's like they have like the government, mayors, and the important thing is that basically because of the inaction at the federal level, so the mayors ended up playing a very important role in how to deal with the pandemic. And so that's what you see essentially that like there's a lot of within state, in the case of Michoacán, essentially a lot of within municipality variation in a given state. So although the federal policies were the same, and then the state governments were the policies were the same, there was so much variation in municipal policies at the local level. I'll show you that in a second. That there's massive variation sort of in COVID cases, relative to the media, the mean of the state. This is for COVID cases. This is for deaths for Zacatecas, and the answer is this. So we call it out for our 500 municipalities. Every single policy the municipal government sort of implemented, and there's a lot of variation. Sort of in terms of like block roads, enforcing mask fines, sort of banning alcohol events, closing business, and so on. Like it's a gigantic variation, very correlated with the color of the party in power. But essentially, like this is like so there's quite a big variation, which also justifies kind of why we feel confident, and importantly, our NGO feels confident in showing this information to people, saying like maybe you want to look into that, ahead of the election. Okay. So how does the design work? This is where everything gets trickier. So let's just start in the abstract, and imagine we have two municipalities. We have two municipalities, and we randomly assign kind of one to control and the other one to treatment. And then what we do is that we get all the secciones electorales, the polling stations within each of the municipalities, and we form compact segments of 5. Okay. So essentially, so imagine you have like 200 secciones electorales, and so and we're gonna basically we have like sort of geographic segments that are all equally populated and very compact. The compactness is important for how we target the ads. I'll explain it in a second. And you can do the same thing for all the treated municipalities. And then you can randomly choose within treated municipalities 2 segments to be treated. And that means essentially that if I want to treat a segment, I'm going to go and I'm going to put points. I'm going to draw 1 kilometer balls around those points. Essentially, and I'm going to do like a huge amount of those. I'm going to cover this whole entire geographic area. And I'm going to go tell Facebook, go and put an ad there. And please target those who actually sleep in a particular place. So I'm making sure that I'm retargeting kind of the registered voters. I can do this. It's quite scary, but essentially you can do this basically at the 1 kilometer buffer level. And if you do that, then what you can do is you can look at the election level data and get 2 main estimates. By comparing precincts in treated places against pure control, I can estimate kind of the direct effect of treatment. And then I can compare what we call spillover segments, which are essentially like control segments in treated municipalities to pure control places. And so I can estimate how much of the information from these folks actually spills over to the rest. Right? And yeah.
Yeah. So you say you know where is the address of the people? No. So the way it works is that you tell Facebook, so you cannot target individual people. So people commute, right? Yeah, that's why. But what you can do is Facebook allows you, at least in Mexico, it's varied by country. You can target people by people that commute, people that sleep there, or both. Okay. This is, by the way, is a new feature. Like it just didn't happen in 2018 when we did another experiment. And so essentially what I'm doing is I'm choosing the option of people that actually like sleep there. And the way it works is that I don't know whether you've seen this all the data that Facebook publishes, but essentially like they track down kind of like using your like GPS position and also the Wi-Fi you're connected to, kind of like where you are, kind of like between midnight and 8 a.m., 8 a.m. to I think 4 p.m. and so on. And scary. Oh yeah. And I have some more insane information from talking to Facebook people I cannot share, but essentially, I think they have a pretty accurate sort of usually like the registers of the like where you vote is not really where you sleep.
Yeah. So I'm not worried about that. And actually, I can tell you that that's mostly not the case. So we actually have like the INE data. ITAM has a deal with INE to get that, and sort of we know quite well that, and sort of most people. This is not the 100%. Do like where they're registered to vote is basically where they live.
I mean, here, I think
Most.
my question when I asked about the municipalities coming along those lines, I think if, especially during the pandemic, a lot of people moved temporarily, like right back to their parents' homes, or
Yeah.
like there was a lot of, I mean, I know from the students, that there was a lot of migration, especially during these years, and I think that was my biggest concern, because it was certainly
Yeah.
not random.
So I get the only thing is I have data on that. So actually I have data. So I have data from Facebook on mobility across municipalities. So I could actually check whether like I think we have looked at this, and so there was no heterogeneity, but
Okay.
I can deal with sort of yeah. But anything, if this was the case, sort of like
Yeah, the results
unless
would-
it moves like somewhere else, and sort of like it should basically undermine the results.
It would just make everything
Yeah.
look like the treatment noisier.
Yeah. So we're quite on power. Okay. But anyway, so that's kind of like what so yes,
I was watching Facebook. It's random.
it's not. But the other thing is that most people do it. So, and this is why, and I'm gonna show you like, like the level of take up on this. So like most of the people we try to target, subject to this valid concern, like actually saw that. Yeah, I'm gonna show you numbers on that.
You will expect the
There are like
supporters of Outlook to be.
So there are several. Yeah, so actually, we went.
To even be able to.
No, but so and this is important. This I'll get into that in a second. But essentially, like this is actually a very valid concern, because if it is the case that the viewership is correlated with the content of the treatment, like the level of COVID cases, and the randomized treatment of whether you depolarize people or not, that actually like change. Like what you're changing is not like how people process the information, but who gets the information. And I can show you that that's not the case. So we have no differential effect on who sees the information as a function of the treatment. Okay, and which is why, because we have like the same first stage across treatment, we can really focus on the reduced form to isolate basically information processing, conditioning on equal seeing. Okay, so I'll explain that in a second. Okay. Great. So this is kind of like the simplest case, 2 municipalities. Now imagine this, by 500. So essentially, what we're going to do is that we're going to have 500 municipalities. First, we're going to basically form blocks of sort of like quote unquote identical municipalities, same level, like same incumbent, same level of COVID cases and so on. And then within those 5 municipalities, we're going to randomly assign one to get like what we call the standard video, where we don't kind of depolarize people, and the other and a second municipality where on top of having the information, we also have the kind of depolarization. Okay. Now, as I said, there are 2 segments, sort of in each of the 3 municipalities. On top of that, what we did is that we play around with also providing information which was cross-randomized about the policies that the government implemented. And essentially the idea was like, maybe you don't just want to show like the COVID cases and death, also you want to show them kind of what the government did about it. And it might be, the municipal government, yeah. And I can tell you that actually, like, so there are no differential effects. So essentially everything I'm going to show you will abstract from this difference. There are 2 potential reasons for that. One is because people already knew that in your municipality, whether like, they were like, you had to, it was enforced mask or not and so on. So you don't know your relative distribution of COVID cases and deaths compared to the rest of the state, but you do know exactly how many policies were implemented, where essential businesses were closed or not. So it might be that it's not novel. The other like tricky one is basically the fact that, we randomize the bias in treatment across municipalities, and then we randomize this policy treatment within municipalities. And since we're going to show you like we have massive spillovers, one possibility is actually is that the informational policies spill over across these places, and that's why we don't have it. We don't know, but essentially like just for you to understand kind of what we have in mind about it. But the rest of what I'm going to show you will abstract from the fact that we also provide information about policies. I'm going to turn on. Yeah, cool, great.
What about the 5? Is it due to a sample size, or
Yeah.
How did you decide the 5?
Oh yeah, so it's coming in a second, but so now I'm gonna tell you now. Essentially, like so there are 2 things. So this type of targeting that you do, you cannot do it in very sparse municipalities because you don't have. Essentially, once you target the ads, people like the Facebook doesn't tell you like I don't have enough people there, and actually like technically in our experience, people do get targeted, but you don't know how many and and you don't really know what you're doing. And then the problem you have is that places. Sort of say about 200,000, that's kind of what we did. Are just like so they're big cities where people kind of even commute a lot and and it's also very expensive to target. So in a way, like we went over markets where like it was not as expensive. and we knew kind of where like who we're targeting were more likely to get it. That said, they're quite like, because we target these mid-level type of municipalities, like it's representative of the country as a whole. Like we don't have the two tails, but we're gonna have like most of the middle. Yeah, so I'll get back to that in a second. So how the kind of the ad works is you're gonna have this, it's like a video that has like this, it's like a slideshow. And it has some music in the back to really like get you interested, emotionally interested in things. That's kind of like where we have converged. And then at first it has like it's a bit of a clickbait. So like you ask people, say, you know how your municipal government kind of responded to the pandemic relative to other municipalities in the States. Then we tell people like the data I want to show you next really like partially reflect the decisions of the municipal governments. And the idea here basically is like, first we want to say partially because we don't want to say it's 100% because with our other things going on, but also we want people like to kind of like pay attention to this. And here is, if we do have it where we include the anti-polarization treatment, oops. And so we ask people like, por favor, considera la siguiente información sin dejarte llevar por tus emociones o preferencias partidistas. Right? And this is right before we introduce the source, where it says in data civica, we think about data like tools for like accountability. Okay, so and so the idea is basically like by now, hopefully people believe it, and so they say, look, maybe like okay, let's see what you have to show me, as opposed to already like fighting back. And then essentially, like in the policy case, we present the policies that were implemented. We wanted to have the number of days that each of the policies was implemented, but it was very hard to actually collect this data in a systematic way. And then we have another sort of like slide to really attract interest, and say like how is it the cases and death of a municipality compared to the rest of the state. And this is how we present the information. So this is kind of state of Mexico, and you show them municipalities with more cases, with intermediate level of cases, with fewer cases. I would just tell you, hey, literally like are you the top tercile, the intermediate tercile, or the bottom tercile. Very, very simple way of conveying. This we pilot, essentially like, we want to put numbers and things like that. People like don't really like, so the 1, 2, 3, they get it. You go further, like they just don't like you just add a lot of noise, and similar thing for that. In addition to that, we're going to show this kind of like this shaded map of the municipality, and we point out kind of where you are. And the idea here is basically kind of like we wanted to people kind of run regressions in their minds. And the idea is that, look, we know that there are other things kind of going on, and so we might kind of want to parcel out things in your head, and sort of maybe you want to like, oh, I know I compare better to the municipality next door and so on. We do that ourselves, sort of, and actually and so on change the distribution after like taking into account the distribution of cohorts. And the reason is that we wanted to make something like very, very clean, and that was not sort of so like that did not basically incorporate our decisions as researcher of kind of what should be in there or not. And also because of politically, I had in 2015, we ran something kind of like similar, and one party kind of took away our leaflets and forced them to attack another party, and we ended up having to defend our project in Congress, in the Permanent Commission of the Senate, to point out essentially that we were like doing everything legit, and they excruciatingly asked us literally how it shows the municipalities and so on. And we had a very clear procedure and very unbiased procedure that they were essentially like that it was very hard to challenge. And because of that, people like kind of actually liked the project, and they were very supportive. But and there was no way for someone to kind of like say that us or the other NGO that we're working with were politically biased, and somehow like it was a hard lesson to learn, sort of, and a good lesson to learn. So this is why we're very, very objective, sort of. Although like I would have wanted to like control for some things, but so that's kind of pretty much what you get. This is roughly 20. Yeah, it's roughly basically like 20-25 seconds. And and I'll tell you how many people see enough to get here. Okay. So like I won't spend too much time on the literature, personally, like there's a whole literature like really like explains why we end up doing this.
Porque cada parte tiene como mucho texto, ¿no?
Yeah, so everything's kind of time, it has like music and so on. So essentially you have enough time to like, we spend a lot of time tweaking that, and sort of like it's not equally spaced slides, and and essentially like what you try to do is that you really like, by the time that it's going to be a shift to the next slide, you kind of like change the music so that people really want to see what's next. And it's like, this is kind of how you try to generate attraction. It's hard.
You have attrition.
On what?
Experiment.
So we have like the full country, essentially, in a way. Like this is not a survey that we have like baseline and like
watching and say,
no, I'm going to show you in a second the data. So like
that would be attrition.
Yeah, but I can tell you, so I know exactly that sort of, and I can show you this. But that's again going back to your earlier question. That's not correlated with type of treatment or the type of information and type of that you get. So in a way that it's not differential if you want to see it that way across treatment arms. No, I'll show you that in a second. So, and very important is something that we had, because this really need to be legit, is that what you could do is that you could go and actually.
Antes de pasar ahí también, ¿y si hay correlación entre el número de políticas y las muertes?
Yeah.
¿O es contradictoria? Si información de que en muchas políticas y luego.
So there is, so if you do like the maps, you know, it's like everything is there, but there is a correlation. Yeah. I have another paper on that. Actually, like mostly focusing on spillovers. There were a lot of spillovers. It's like, and you ban alcohol here, and people will go to the next municipality, and you have more cases. Sort of because you generate, so it's a bit tricky. But you know, on average, yes. Yeah. Although it's not costly.
Sí, más bien lo que me preocupa es que a una misma persona le des información como contradictoria. De que sí hubo muchas políticas, pero estás muy mal. Eso no pasa en tu experimento.
So in a way, like this at least empirical, this ended up being inconsequential. Like we can, however you look at policies, you know, saying earlier, like no differential effect. Like there's nothing. We have interactive policies with anything you might want to think. Like fully like saturized, you know, like continuous, you know, absolutely like policies have no impact on how people process the information. You know, so that at least, you know, but in a priori, so some background on the project, but it's like there was a big internal divide in the team in terms of like what to randomize across municipalities and what to randomize within. And basically it's policy versus depolarization. This is like a theoretical literature on what you're saying, which is essentially like, you know, like you should update very differently about certain outcome information depending on what was the input. No? And that's somehow what that type of treatment was trying to do. And we had like a couple team members very interested in that. And some of the team members were like, you know, like, this is like red herring, this is not first order, let's focus on polarization. And the grad student decided he was the tiebreaker, and sort of he decided to go for this. So, and I mean, I cannot tell you that there's no effect. It could be that it's like there was so much spillover that policy could have been consequential, but we can estimate it, or maybe it's not. So who knows? Okay, so I was saying, like, you could click on the ad and you would get to the Data Civica page, and they hosted essentially, like, you know, for every single municipality in the sample, including control, all this information, the sources, and you could click, like, you can go to the original documents, like everything was perfectly documented. And actually, a lot of people did that. I'll get to it in a second. And we ran this essentially, like, we started 10 days before the election, and so we ran it for a week until the electoral ban started. So that's so it's very close to the election. And the whole point is that we really wanted to prevent, like, parties reacting to information or media reacting to information. So it's not just really it's the treatment doing the work and not kind of like responses to the treatment. Yeah, I'll explain the criteria to choose the municipality.
Y eso no hay ninguna variación así interesante, ¿no? De como fue una semana, pues la gente que lo tenía como en los últimos días más cercanos a la elección versus.
No, everybody gets it at the same time. Yeah. So you place the ad in 200 municipalities. We have like maybe a 1 day variation because of like placing 200 ads. It's you know, actually times 2. It's quite time consuming, but yeah.
And you got it several times or just once?
No, I'll talk about it. You get it several times. Yeah. So on average, like 3.5. Yeah. So yeah. Like estimation is pretty standard, you know, some outcome, it's gonna be like mostly like vote share for the incumbent, we control for the lag vote share, and we're gonna have a blood randomization of fixed effects, and then we can estimate kind of like the effect of getting like the standard ad, or getting like the anti-polarization ad, and also relative to control, which is the baseline category, or being in a control area in a treated municipality, and therefore you're a spillover place of a standard treatment or an anti-polarization treatment. And the important thing is that we don't care really about this. We really care about differentially depending on the information that people saw. We're gonna have to run like all these things sort of interacted with whether you're in the top tercile, the bottom tercile, and the intermediate tercile. And
so is there a reason why you're including the previous incumbent share?
Yeah, power. Yeah,
it should be balanced, right?
It's balanced by statistical power. So I mean, these are like these type of designs, you know, like that is like at the macro level, like they're very underpowered and sort of, and there are two things that really make your day. One is the block fixed effects when they're randomized, and the other is basically is the Larreguy share. But this is balanced, of course. Like this is an expert, you know, things are balanced. Yeah. So let me jump to the results first on the kind of the first stage. So essentially, as I mentioned, we had like 8.1 million people seeing the ad, but these are just 2.3 unique Facebook users. So that means, you know, on average, someone saw it like 3.5 times. Okay. So if you look at so you take into account like the number of adults, this is just targeted to adult people. Now we actually succeeded in targeting. And you try to divide this by the number of registered voters in those places where we targeted the ads. So essentially we got a 70% kind of first stage. This is though a bit of a lie though, because as someone asked before, it's not the people that people actually see it all the time. It's like they go all the way. A bunch of people kind of like I tried. And so I can tell you that 30% still, you know, like saw the ad at least 15 seconds, which is kind of what you need to get to the slide where you see some information. So which is great. Having a 30% first stage on Facebook nationwide, certainly not what we expected. So like, we're very happy, although it was very costly to actually get that there. Yeah.
The parameter of interest is different.
What do you mean?
His intention to treat also.
Yeah. So essentially, so this is basically like first stage, but everything I'm going to show you is intent to treat. Now, that's it. What's very important though is this bullet point for you is that what you cannot have in order to, if you want to focus in ITT, is that people saw the treatment shaped who saw the ad and for how long. Actually, we can show that, you know, like none of the things is basically differentially correlated, you know, depending on the type of information that you saw. So in a way, like we're good, which is why it justifies that we can go reduce form and just focus on ITT. Also, importantly here, like we cannot really do the IV because we don't have the level, we don't know sort of at the precinct level how many. So yeah, this is basically just data aggregated at the ad level. Okay, but so it's just for you to have a sense. And something important also reflects the amount of interest in this type of information is that close to 85,000 people went to Data Civica webpage to check the information. Something that also like that did not happen in the past, and you know, shows up that indicates that, you know, really like that they were quite interested in the information.
And this would be a share of we would have to think about this 85,000 users of the
2.3.
Of the 2.3.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's not a huge share.
No.
But still, you know,
It's okay. It's a lot.
We thought it would be totally inconsequential, and but this essentially reflects, you know, people like that were genuinely interested in so
no, that they really did pay attention to
Yeah.
the ad, right?
Right. So I'm gonna now.
Sorry, and were those balanced across treatment?
We don't know.
Okay.
So this is basically like, so is that this is so they can also, this is basically, you know, unique IPs.
Okay.
You know, irises are getting into
Right.
and so
Because that's different. It's not
we
linked
cannot, yeah, and you cannot really
That's right.
target that well the IP addresses to.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a lot of plots that look like this. At the bottom, so at the top, we're going to have whether the direct effects and whether the heterogeneity is by tercile of cases or tests. And then I'm going to show you a plot on the left, which is basically like the standard treatment coefficients. And then on the right, basically when people get depolarized. This is basically like the raw data. These are just basically averages. So you know, everything is of course estimated jointly. Really, like the point estimate you care is the slope. So don't focus too much on the point on the confidence interval. You really care about kind of the slope of the two plots. And basically what we plot basically is a treatment effect on both share for incumbent as a function of whether, like, when you go to standard treatment, you are the upper tercile, the intermediate tercile, or the bottom tercile. So this is basically bad news, and this is good news. Okay. And what you see is that if you have a standard treatment, you have people that get relatively more negative information are more likely to support the incumbent. The difference between these 2 points is actually 5 percentage points. Everything in this paper is 4 or 5 percentage points, and it's significant. Okay, so if you sort of like, oh, good point, because also then it's hard to know. They all look the same. So okay. So, however, if you depolarize people, you go back to ovation world, where essentially like people who see bad information relatively punish more compared to those that see good information. Okay.
Okay, so it's like the world which is polarized, and then you
Polarized,
polarize the world.
depolarized, exactly. And so, and basically like Bayesian, non-Bayesian, and again, so like the specific things basically 2-3 percentage points. The difference always is roughly 5 percentage points. Okay, this is basically like for direct effects. If you do for spillover effects, pretty much identical. There's people really talk in these places, and there's a lot of like sort of activity on social media. I have a previous paper that already established it, so it's like no news. And actually, like, and they do this even more the more segments you treat. So if you do basically one segment versus four segments, like really like the amount of spillovers is way greater. So even among the directly targeted people, the fact that like everybody's getting it really gets people to internalize information. So no novelty, but essentially it's a very consistent result. Now we can do the same thing for about now what you do to look at your actual point testing is I can take sort of the difference. Yeah.
Are they joint treatments?
Yeah, everything is estimated in the same regression. Yeah.
Because no, what I mean is, why would you say if I interpret this? I can tell AMLO, you should keep trying to avoid any kind of anti-polarization.
Of course.
Because otherwise your base.
Of course. I mean, he knows what he's doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
So
then,
I mean,
but then the treatment is different.
so but in a way, like
You have then it's a composed treatment here. Anti-polarization and information.
well, but this is why sort of like the fact that this was randomized. This is exactly where I'm going next. But now I can look at the difference between these two slopes, and this is exactly what you see over here. And essentially, what you see is if in a polarized world, if you compare for a given level of information, basically like kind of the depolarized people versus not, you see a significant strong effect. And this is as opposed to sort of if people actually sort of which means that you can flip it, and it tells you so it is kind of like the loss of votes that kind of like AMLO would get when if he depolarizes people when people are talking bad about him. He actually gains this relative to that particular scenario. He gains 5 percentage points. Okay, so it's literally so in a way like for a populist, it's great that everybody is super polarized. Attack me. I'm just getting more votes. Okay, that's kind of literally what's happening in that context.
No, for a populist would say, no, I'm not prepared to give the voice or make any rational discussion, or it's only me who has the publicity of.
I mean, there are other considerations. Okay, generalize what a populist does, but in particular, if you want to think about like just the information provision part, which is what I have in the experiment, I can tell you that at least. So yeah, but yeah, there are other considerations as well. So this is basically when you take the difference between the two for direct and this is for spillover, again, very strong effects. Sort of quite shocking, right? Great. So this is what you do with tests, sort of like the same plots, same slopes. This is for direct effects. This is for spillover effects. This is the difference between the two. It's slightly noisier, but pretty much you have very strong effects. So essentially, like depolarizing people, like make them like you have a big gain in terms of accountability. This is kind of like the effect of depolarizing people. So like once you you want bad people to be punished and kind of good people to be rewarded. Now, so that's pretty much kind of like the where I could stop. So like I can tell you it's quite scary. We live in a very polarized world. It's kind of very hard to generate accountability by telling voters like whether someone basically it's behaving it's performing well or bad. And pretty much kind of like what happens, like going back to the initial plot, is that it's essentially that if you are getting sort of like negative information about incumbent, what's happening is that the supporters kind of like fight that information and they're more likely to vote. It's actually good. The opposition people like they punish even more like even more strongly, and that's kind of like so you have two sets of different compliers. That sort of seems to be sort of consistent throughout, and I'm going to show you additional information later. That's kind of what's going on. So, sure. 20 minutes. Huh? Yeah, cool. Great. So let's get a bit on kind of mechanisms and sort of and anticipate this quite a bit. So first, we're going to start looking at different sets of outcomes. The kind of the angry reactions to Facebook ads and turnout, and essentially the prediction that you have with the motivators in the model is that when you have people people are still polarized, essentially there has to be a relationship between kind of this costly behavior and the information they get, but that should go away. Sort of like when it comes to emotions, when people are basically are like you remove away the emotions and they're not polarized and it's just basically irrational, right? With turnout, essentially, like it's like you should see very similar patterns as the one we saw before, that these effects are driven essentially by differential turnout. And then I can get to heterogeneity later. So this is basically like angular center reactions when people are still polarized, and you have slope as you expected, flat behavior once you remove the emotions.
The reactions in Facebook. Or
Either-
you put
yeah,
like an anti-
Yeah, to the Facebook ad.
to the Facebook ad, okay.
Yeah, we don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, people waste a lot of time on these things. Like several thousands. I don't have the exact number.
This is also a first stage, right? Like it's.
No. It's intended to treat because it's like conditioning on seeing the information whether you want to engage in this behavior or not. I mean, so I mean clearly, yeah. So and also we know that there's no differential first stage, and therefore like this is really conditioning on seeing the information whether like you wanna have an angry reaction to that or not. And
the reaction, like reacting, like you can react angry, you cannot react, but also it's like a measure of whether.
It's part of the mechanism. So in a way, it's reflective of the mechanism. That's how we see it. Sort of like if you look at the motivators in the literature, like once you want to fight back, you fight back, right? And so this is kind of like so like I'm angry, so basically I just don't like this, and certainly like that's the case, man. However, if you are like chill because I depolarize you, and I'm not saying that it's like this happens for everybody, it's like you don't react proportionally to the information as a function of so like you don't react to the information consistently with the type of information that you're seeing. So and as you would expect maybe from.
So I cannot see what in the middle is no reaction, like I cannot see the.
Oh no, this is they're all the same plots. This is basically like good information, bad information, intermediate level information, and
the stuff is whether you have any reaction. Like
this basically is the number of reactions per. We have different measures per 1,000 Facebook users. Yeah.
Okay,
So, but the denominator is not it's not endogenous. This is basically it's always like related to the targeted people. Yeah, so that's why the thing is ITT. Yeah. Great. This is basically what you see with cases. This is what you see with death. Trust me, there's a confidence interval I cannot get to show, but it's kind of there. And again, you have a clear slope, and it's basically flat. Now, more interestingly, it's the effect on turnout. So if you are to depolarize, you see a kind of a relatively flat effect on turnout. It's very interesting that essentially that people who see negative information, now they're much more likely to turn out to kind of counter that type of information. So in a way, like the effects on turnout, they're mostly reflect, especially for cases. For this, it's more like the vouchers. But really, and the idea is that I'm not happy with the person, but then you attack that my incumbent, and so I'm gonna go against you. And so I was thinking of not turning out, but now I'm actually gonna go and support my guy. This is for direct effect.
Pero a lo mejor también piensan que muchos más están viendo la misma información, ¿no?
Yeah, and so we cannot get into that, but possibly and we could have done that.
Viendo esto, seguramente están haciendo una campaña en contra de mi candidato.
No, and that's a perfectly acceptable interpretation. So unfortunately, in this experiment, we did not kind of change that, and we could have given you a more precise answer. It's just this is very costly, and very underpowered. Yeah. Again, so this is basically so this direct effects for turnout for cases. This is basically spillover effects. This is you take the difference again between the two, and again, as I mentioned, it's really concentrated on the ones that are seeing kind of negative information about the person they like. This is basically if you do with deaths, same story. Spillover deaths. Difference between the two, so it's very consistent. Essentially, turnout and vouchers kind of go pretty much in hand, especially for COVID cases. And again, as I tell you, everything is 5 percentage point differential in this paper, pretty much between 4 and 5. Okay, so sizable numbers. Now let's get into the heterogeneity, which is a little trickier. Essentially, what you have. So essentially, we're going to run everything you saw, but looking at heterogeneity by first by lag voucher, and the idea is the following.
Sorry, heterogeneity
by lagged voucher. Actually, if you take the voucher for the incumbent in the previous election in the same precinct.
trying to.
So the main outcome for us is basically is the vote share for the incumbent at the casilla electoral. Okay. Now take it's not so they take the same number, but in the past election. And the idea is that kind of like that's our best measure of like of prior beliefs about the incumbent. Okay. So and the idea is that in innovation world, if you have high views about the incumbent and I give you negative information, you should really like update drastically and change your vote much more.
That's an aggregate.
Oh, this is always an aggregate. Yeah. So and again, so this is like we're working with like aggregate information at the precinct and sort of on the municipal level, and with all the caveats that you have, but that's kind of what we have in an experiment that basically is like a fifth of the country. Okay. So and we want to basically be shielded about like issues of the desirability in answering questions and so on. This is why we really focus on vote shares. So subject to this, sort of like what you'd expect is that. Yeah, but let me wrap up this because actually this is quite complicated to follow for most people. And so and the idea is that if you have high vote share at baseline, so you have high priors, and if you are basically a de-biased person, the bigger was my prior kind of the vote share for the incumbent, the more I should punish when I see negative information about the incumbent. In contrast, if I'm a motivated reasoning person, the higher my prior was, the more I want to engage in motivated reasoning. And therefore, I want to fight that information, and and I should more backfire. I should get experience more backfire. Okay. In reality, what happens, as you say, is that it's not we de-bias everybody and sort of or that or everybody will engage in motivated reasoning. So it's a pool of things. So what you should have essentially like the prediction is that the slope on past vote share should be a lot more negative for Bayesian than for motivated reasoning. And that's pretty much what you file over here. Right? So essentially like this has a significantly negative more effect when you look at the interaction between anti-polarization, tertial cases, and previous vote share, when people are kind of more rational because you depolarize them, versus when you still like have like a lot of people engaging sort of in motivated reasoning. Okay, that's kind of the idea. Now,
¿Estas fueron elecciones de presidentes municipales?
Hubo muchas cosas, pero nos enfocamos solo en presidentes municipales, sí.
Entonces, la polarización que están considerando es a nivel municipal.
A nivel municipal, sí.
Ok,
yeah.
Entonces, es que
empieza
la historia como con AMLO.
No, es macro motivation, but yeah. Very important, como, yeah, it's very interesting. This is not just a Morena story. So obviously, like if you restrict the Morena places and the line incumbent, you get noisier because they're fewer, but you get similar results. But if you just do basically Morena versus no Morena, you don't get this. So it's not really about like people taking the information that you give them about incumbent, the municipal incumbent, and just associating that with the federal incumbent. That's not happening. So, which we thought was very interesting. There was a possibility that was the case. That's not the case.
The policies were federal.
No, but the only thing we show them is no, this is the whole point. I think most policies actually beyond closing schools, beyond closing schools, most policies were implemented by the mayors and enforced by the mayors. So this is also importantly, we're focused on within state level variations. This is why we have the third side. So in a way, like we're fixing federal and state level policies and just focusing on what had to do with the mayors. Great. So then we can do kind of the exact same thing as it's actually easier with like what are called communal values. And so the idea is that some people, and there's a whole literature like the big person on this is Jonathan Haidt. That means that's your phone or is outside? Yeah. They have 2 minutes. Yeah. No, I should be fine with that. So essentially, there's a very cool work by Jonathan Haidt that really motivated by the polarization in the United States. That people have like. So we have like there are different sets of values, and so some people have like very universalistic values, like they care about the environment, like they care about sort of like a kind of more macro things. And other people actually really care about their people, and so basically so they have the universalistic people and the communal people. It is not a perfect. It's not an either or. So you can be a bit of both, but or just one of them or none. And what's very cool for us in terms of measurement is that the Jonathan Haidt developed what this dictionary is called the Moral Foundation Dictionary, where essentially like for different sets of values, he identified the words that are kind of associated with that type of value. So for example, like if you go to the value, so the Moral Foundation Dictionary, you have like people that care about community issues, that care about religion, individuals, family, tradition, and patriotism are sort of identified as people that having like strong communal values. And this is like survey data trying to validate these things. Now, this is a very long list. But what's very cool is that this is also a list that Facebook gives me to target people. So what I can do is I can go and set an app at the municipality level and say like, just tell me how many adults I will get if I target everybody, X number. And then now I want to restrict to those people that actually have one of these values, like have one of these interests. That's my numerator. The ratio between the two identifies the share of people who actually like that for Facebook considers have some sort of communalism level, the local level.
Depende del contenido que ven.
No, this is basically unconstrained on the. So you can set up. So I want to know like you're gonna go like to every place in the world and really like know how many people are there. That if you were to target any ad, irrespective of that. So here it's very good. This is not like my ad. It's not a Facebook thing. It's thinking about my ad and then thinking about it's basically just the population of users that.
Claro.
They are in the municipality and that they identify having one of these interests.
So you're using Facebook targeting algorithm to get information about the municipality?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And I know exactly how many kind of communal people.
Claro, pero Facebook como solo que tienes esos valores.
Well, no, this is the
No, no,
beauty.
they use.
This is the beauty. So you have, if you go,
Facebook para ver cómo
exactly. So
targetean.
if you set up an ad, when you go and you set up an ad, this is basically a business. Imagine, I have I'm selling diapers. So I would like to target people that Facebook thinks that they care about the family. So as opposed to wasting money on people that care about sports. So this is, which by the way is another category. I can really like click on family, right? Yeah. So these are categories that on which Facebook allows you to target specific users.
Yeah,
Pero ¿cómo sabe Facebook?
Oh, well, it has an algorithm. Yeah. Well, so the detail is in the devil is in the detail. So essentially, like they have algorithm. That's kind of the business, right? In a way, like
You say, I want to target religious people, and
yeah,
Facebook will tell you, you will get 100 users on municipality
Yeah.
A and 20 on municipality B.
And imagine a
then
post for
you
1,000. Yeah.
identify municipality A as very religious and municipality B
Correct,
as
yeah.
very religious.
Yeah.
So you're like basically using their
Their data
strategy
to characterize people on weird things. Because like how do you measure communalism, right? So this way. So I set up another constraint. This is just
It's very cool.
But the point is that the things that you target, like the words that you select are the words of Facebook.
no. So this is important. So the Moral Foundation Dictionary has like a list. I don't know, like say 20 words for that characterize communal people, and then Facebook has like another like. Yeah, that's my point. Facebook has like 50 words. The overlap are these 6. So actually, like
How Facebook targets those people, like.
but they are identified as having those values. So I can construct a measure of
But in theory, you should be able to test if the treatment and control groups have same.
Oh, no, this is balanced, but I'm gonna look at heterogeneity on that. So
Pre-treatment, there should be.
yeah, essentially, by virtual organization, essentially, like these things should be balanced, and and I can tell you that they're balanced. So like close streamers. But
You didn't do.
no, it's balanced. Yeah. Things are balanced. So
Yes.
yeah, this is the beauty of randomizing. Sort of like on average, things are balanced. Now, but I don't care about the level effect. I care about the interaction. So what theory predicts is that people who are engaging in motivated reasoning should be even more so in places where I have a high share of people with communal values, but this should be irrelevant for Bayesian. So for Bayesian people, essentially, their values, if they're behaving Bayesian, should not be driving your motivated reasoning. That's exactly what we find. So essentially, you can run sort of the interaction between sort of like standard communal and so this is the standard global treatment, and indeed you see that there's way more backfiring in places where you have a high share of communal people. There's no differential effect on when people are biased on communal values.
That's because of the theory of.
All the theory, yeah, exactly. So you should only back so like values should only kick in when you're engaging in motivated reasoning. So on average, you're way less likely to do it when you're depolarized, and effectively, like we don't see that having a bite. And these two things are statistically different from each other. And the last thing is essentially stress, and like subject to the imperfectness of the measure. Again, what you should see essentially is that like when people are engaging in motivated reasoning, the more stress there is, the more they should do it. If they're depolarized, it should have no effect, and it's literally what you find. Essentially, people like in places with more domestic violence, which is our imperfect measure of stress. You have indeed like this more this greater backfiring, but that has no bite when people are depolarized. Yeah.
Can you repeat again why domestic violence like?
So the idea, the theory is really the role of stress. Essentially, sort of both. If you come stressed into the lab, and I give you something that's counterintuitive,
stress.
Yeah, exactly. So at the municipal level, you know, like unless there's some data, I don't know, for the whole world, for the whole country, and like, you know, I don't have anything better. So we try to identify kind of like measures of economic stress, kind of how strong like they were hit by that, and but you don't have systematic data. So you can look at the IMSS data on wages, but the problem is that didn't move. So formal employment didn't move that much in Mexico, and then so the only informal stuff we have would be like ETOE, like the version of the NOE during the pandemic, but it's like it's not representative at the municipal level, right? So and you know, I have some students like writing thesis on gender-based violence, so I had that in mind, sort of, and you know, certainly, like, you know, if you look at the literature, you know, stress and financial stress and gender-based violence are quite related. So that's, you know, other main steps to get here, but at least it's consistent. So I mean, altogether, essentially, the idea is that, you know, we have like 5 different findings that point out that it's like you know, the motivated reasoning seems to be driving sort of like a lot of the backfiring effect that we observe, right? And it's not just about the heterogeneity with the biased people, it's really how that the absence of the heterogeneity or the differential heterogeneity when people actually get depolarized that makes it very consistent with the theory. So to wrap up, so certainly we're not like we care about, you know, how is that, you know, the rising levels of polarization, which I maybe should have like some macro pictures for the world, but certainly Latin America is like really going up. And as we care about that, and certainly in Mexico, sort of like might be really having a pernicious effect on accountability, measure us, you know, like how people respond to information, whether they reward kind of good incumbents and punish bad ones. You can think of other measures of whether you're delivering public goods or not, but that's kind of like what we can look at that. Look at essentially, and what we do is that we provide. So we have an experiment that really basically has like 2 sources of randomization. On the one hand, we play around with information, and on the other hand, we try to debias people or not. But precisely essentially because we expected to have a much more muted effect. We did not anticipate necessarily having a backfiring. So essentially we expected it essentially having like a stronger effect once we debias people as opposed to not being debiased. So in a way, like we got the differential right. We were not sure that the level would be so crazy and people would be backfiring. And that's it. That's where it was very helpful for power. And essentially that's kind of like what we find is that it is indeed the case that you know, like people kind of backfire when and this is likely explained by kind of motivated reasoning. In turn, kind of once you kind of nudge them not to basically like trigger, you know, defensive processing, we're able to restore the kind of like motivation model. That said, sort of like you know, like the way we read this is that, you know, like our intervention suggests that there's potential for this kind of nudging to kind of restore, you know, motivationless in processing. We're not saying that, you know, we nail it down, right, in a way that this is kind of the way we should be doing it, but essentially it suggests that, you know, we should be spending more time possibly going back to the lab and trying to understand, you know, in different societies, kind of like you know, like how to prevent this type of defensive processing, and then trying to bring it back to quote unquote real world feeling to the field. Yeah. There's also more Machiavelli's sort of like a interpretation of this, which is essentially like I can do whatever I want with any voter, right? So like depending on what I show them and whether I depolarize them or not, and but that's certainly not the policy application that we're pushing for. Just in case that one of you thought, I always get someone in the audience like, but what about if you know? So yeah, you can do that. Yeah.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias. ¿Alguien tiene alguna otra pregunta o comentario?
Let's know the argument. What would you suggest, AMLO? You would suggest AMLO to keep being.
He's know what he's doing, yeah.
Probably.
Right, because that would avoid getting people into a reason.
Yeah, of the record, yeah, and yeah.
We're just about to withdraw the Article 33 from the Constitution, which is the one that they spelled for years.
Yeah, I know. I'm very aware of that. I feel like so the moment I can become Mexican, I become Mexican, and so I keep doing stuff, and yeah.
You should call the paper "Polarize and Conquer."
Yeah. No, and
actually, let me just mention as
maybe we should stop the Zoom. Yeah. Yeah.
Pues,
Hay que
finalizar, ¿no? Video.
Dios.
Um, perfect.
Still recording.
Sí.
Yeah, also it's recording and also on Facebook, you know, and like I said, this is why I'm more careful.
Aquí arriba, ¿no? Si le pico aquí,
Ajá, acá.
Finalizar.
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 No, abajo.
Abajo.
Well, stop. Ya, finalizar.
como que no hace mucho caso. A ver, déjame dejar.
Es que hay una, bueno, tiro de negar.